It's Chelsea,
It's Nina,
and
and
you're
you're
in
in
the
the
Critics
Critics
Kingdom.
Kingdom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Critics Kingdom. This week we actually want to do one of the classics and also one of the more serious DCOMs that I think Disney ever or has done, which is Tiger Cruise. It came out in 2004, and it stars our fave Hayden Panettiere, also with Bill Pullman, who is a great actor playing her father. And this is definitely one that I remember liking, even though it has a serious subject matter, but I really remember enjoying it when I was a kid. And we really enjoyed rewatching it and found it quite engaging upon the rewatch. And Nina, I know that you said that you also really enjoyed this one when you were younger as well.
Yeah, I did. And, just a quick, just warning, trigger warning for anyone listening. This film deals with, terrorist attacks, and it's centered around, in particular, 9/11, and we will be discussing that at length. So if that is, it's a traumatic event, and therefore, if that has the potential to trigger any sort of discomfort for anyone, we would maybe suggest not listening to this episode, or coming back at a later date, but just saying that for everyone to be generally aware. That said, yeah, this one was, it was definitely super impactful for me as a child. I was in New York City, when the towers were struck on 9/11. I was a kid. I was, 8 years old. I'd actually just turned eight. My birthday was like 10 days before I had just turned eight. And yeah, it was a movie that, as a kid, like, there was a lot of things about 9/11 at the time, obviously, but it was one of those moments where, like, I felt represented, I felt heard, I felt, it was nice to have someone talking directly to me about this thing that really was like a defining moment of our lives. Most of my life, like, I know that my life changed drastically on that day. And yeah, it's just, it was a big deal, and this film made me feel seen, or cared about, I guess, in the midst of all of that going on. So I had very fond memories of it. And yeah, I guess with that, maybe we should tell you what this was about.
Yeah, if you want to get into the recap.
Happily. So the basic framework for this film is that it takes place over 5 days. It begins on September 9th, 2001, and it's framed around the concept of this thing called a tiger cruise, which is when Navy families are allowed onto the Navy ship, and they go out to sea for like a couple of days to, get to spend some time with their loved ones who are at sea, but also see how they live, and, just get a better, like, understanding and appreciation for what their loved ones do, um, as members of the Navy. So that's the basic premise of it, and we sort of get introduced to, like, various characters who are all going onto the ship to see different people. Our main character, played by Hayden Panettiere, is Maddie Dolan, and we see that, like, usually she's about 16 or 15. We see that usually it's her little sister that goes, but this year she decided that she wanted to go, and her mom and her sister are both kind of like, that's very strange, like, you never want to go. Sort of the idea of, like, you seem to always be angry at your dad, so it's weird that you want to go see him. And she is like, oh, like, I want to go. And they're like, okay, fine, cool. So we see her packing. We also see some other characters. We see this maybe, I don't know, 12, 13-year-old black boy, Anthony, from New York. He's going to see his brother. And we get the sense that he's just a kid who is sort of maybe uninterested in, like, discipline. he's not a bad kid. He's just like, he's clearly like more creative. He's always like drumming. Like he has like drumsticks that he carries with him everywhere. And he just seems like someone who's not very interested in like the structure of things, which is a juxtaposition to, it seems, his brother and his father. We see Tina, who is around Anthony's age. She's about 13, 14. She's Latina, and she is going to see her sister Grace, and she's the type of kid who like really admires what her sister does, and is really excited for the day that she gets to, one day don the uniform and join the Navy and sort of follow in her sister's footsteps. She thinks it's so cool, thinks it's so great, all of that. And then we see like Joey, he's little, he's like 8, and he's going to see his mom. And, that's just basically that, like the obvious things. He's excited to go see his mom as opposed to Maddie, who's like got something with her dad, like the idea that he's sort of too young to have those feelings yet. And then we also see an older gentleman, Chuck Horner, who's going to see his son, who's one of the cooks on the ship. And he's a military vet himself. Or is it? I can't remember if it's specifically Navy vet.
He's a Marine Corps vet.
Marine Corps vet. Yeah, he's a Marine Corps vet. His brother works at the Pentagon. So Danny's uncle works at the Pentagon. We get that super early. And so it's, they're a military family is the idea. So these are like our sort of main characters. And we find out that Maddie's dad is actually the XO on the ship. So, we arrive on the first day, and it's essentially all, kind of just like fun and games, but it's coupled with like the early seeds of family drama. We get Chuck is sort of coming down on his son. Like, I don't understand why you like to be in here making bread. Like, you could jump ranks so quickly with one call from your uncle. Like and his son is trying to like be like, Dad, no, I like what I do. Like, I like my rank. Like, let me navigate this thing on my own. We see that like Anthony and his brother don't necessarily get along, and Anthony might be there in more of like a boot camp, like you need to go spend time with your brother and like learn some discipline kind of way. We see that Grace she loves her job, and it's not that she's discouraging Tina in any way from like wanting to do military, but she's trying to communicate to her that, you don't like, just slow down a bit, because it's more than just a cool uniform. Like, it's a real job, and it's at times like scary job or dangerous job. And Tina doesn't necessarily get that yet. And of course, Maddie is just her dad. She's like, you don't come home. You're never home. You make me move all the time. And apparently there's gangs of children that hate military brats and jump her and her sister whenever they enter the school. I don't think any of that's true. But
as a military brat, can confirm. Not true. In my experience or any of my friends' experience.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, maybe if you were going to a different country where they weren't about the like military presence of America in their country, but I don't think in like, we're like, I forget exactly where she's from, like
they're
Chicago.
They're living in New Jersey right now.
New Jersey now, but like, yeah, definitely like in New Jersey, nobody's jumping you because your parents are in the Navy. That's crazy. Like, that's not what's happening. Like, you might have like, that's one of those things that you maybe walked in with a chip on your shoulder, and something else went down, and you see it one way, but it was a bit more complicated, and that's why the school called mama and was like, she been fighting, come get your child. But anywho, I digress a bit. So like, that's day one. And on day two, like, so essentially like her, like Maddie, Tina, Anthony, and then like Joey, because nobody's looking after these children. So like Maddie essentially babysits this child the whole time. Like they like form a little crew, and on the next day, there's like this flight simulation situation that's happening on the deck, and like everybody's supposed to watch from designated areas. But Anthony's a bit of a rebel, and like Maddie's a bit of a rebel too, because she's like mad at her dad. And Tina's like along for the ride, like she's down to do whatever, and she wants to get as close to the action as possible. So they sneak onto the deck where the flight simulation is happening. They get caught, and they get really heavily reprimanded by like all of their family, and like you feel like that disappointment, and like the children feeling that disappointment of like this is not a joke. Like, this is a serious thing. So that's September 10th. The next morning, it's 9/11. And we know what happens. We see images of, the towers. We see images of the planes in the towers before they crumble. We get like sort of the deep antsiness of it, because they don't have the ship doesn't have full information yet, and communication is, locked down. The ship is in full on lockdown, and they have to communicate that to their passengers. They have to tell them, this is what's happening in the country right now. And so Maddie is sort of watching her father in this crisis mode, and he also sort of gives her the task of, sort of being a leader to these kids. And sort of says, so, like the idea that like we have a crisis and we have to deal with that. And we also have like 800 passengers on board or something crazy. It's like this idea of like there are 800 civilians and we have to figure out a way to like do our jobs, but also manage that. And I'm asking you to like step up a little bit here and like just help me out with the younger ones. And do what you can. And we see like, it's really like sweet moments of, like the kids are scared and, they're worried about their parents. They're doing like all of this stuff. And we see her like go and, just like we watch kids hold each other through this trying time, which is, it's a really like pleasant thing to see. And it was one of those things of like me really understanding like, yeah, like this is why this movie was such a big deal to me. And on day 4, it's like, it's still continued, like the uncertainty of it all. But like the fear is sort of ratcheted up a bit because people still haven't been able to communicate with the outside world. And in particular, Chuck Horner, he's really worried about his brother. And he's like coming down on the XO, like, you got, like, let me get one message out. Let me get one message out. And her dad's eventually like, okay, like, I can't let you do that. But what you can do is just give me his name and his rank and his department. And I will ask about him when I have a chance to. I'll ask for him. And when news comes in about the Pentagon, like, I'll ask about him. And ultimately we see that, he has to tell Chuck Horner that like his brother's missing. So they don't do the full on like he's dead thing, but they do, Disney does communicate, which is, I also was very appreciative of that. Like, yeah, people died. Mm-hmm. People were never seen. Bodies weren't found. Mm-hmm. Like some bodies weren't found, and we actually can't even say, we're presuming that they're dead. And there are families who have to deal with that, who are living with that still. So like they put that in there for kids, and I appreciate that. And then, and Maddie finds out from her dad. He tells her that like, listen, like you can't, like I can't come home anymore, because he told her that he had heard her. On the second day, he tells her that like, I heard you, and I'm making the decision. I talked to your mom, and I'm gonna come home. I'm gonna essentially quit the Navy. And after like, and then after the day after 9/11, he's like, I can't do that. I can't leave these people. I'm their command. Like I can't leave them in a time of crisis like this. I can't do that. And at first she's kind of upset about it, and then she has this talk with Anthony, who we figure out that he's not just from New York. He's specifically from Staten Island, and this is something that I've talked to Chelsea about too before. But essentially, he says the thing about like, a lot of people in my neighborhood like work in those towers because it's right across the water. And like kids in my class, their parents are cops and firemen, and they're the ones who are going and like into those buildings. And we sort of get this thing, and like, so Maddie just hears from him like this idea of like, it's not just her dad, you know what I mean? Like this, she starts to understand that this is bigger than just her and her family and the strife that it might cause them. Like those cops and those firemen also had families, but they run into that building without hesitation. They go into that rubble without hesitation. And a lot of them also too, like don't make it out of that. So she sort of, she comes to a place where she like gets it more, and she sort of tells her dad, like, I understand, I get it. And on the last day of the cruise, essentially like we see that moment of like these kids trying to like channel all of the uncertainty, all of the fear, like all of these just like emotions that they don't know what to do with into like something a little bit creative. Like, I mean, it's not she draws a lot, and I thought that they were gonna have her like do some art thing with the kids. That's not really what happens. Anthony starts drumming on some pots in the kitchen, and then like they like them and like Danny like they play pots in the kitchen for a little bit, and then when Maddie's like, I have an idea of something that will bring us all together again. I really thought it would be something artistic. They unfurl a flag on the ship, the American flag. They unfurl the American flag on the ship. Together, a very large American flag, which sure. And then they dock and everybody like goes home, and the ship goes back out to sea, and we end on, the American flag waving. Or like the American flag, like a superimposed waving while we see it from up on high, an aerial shot of them on the deck with the flag.
Right.
And we feel very proud to be American.
Yeah, I was actually shocked that they didn't play that song at the end.
Me too. I was like,
because
did you not get rights for that?
Peak, like all of those, like super Americana songs.
110%. I literally have I need to find this album in my house because it, during this period of time, one day my dad came home with an American song compilation album. Not album, CD. But I just remember that the CD jacket, it was like red, blue, and black. You know what I mean? Because it was a dark time, but we were still strong. That's what the jacket was. And yeah, we played that CD a lot. I loved that CD. I ate that up. So yeah, that is Tiger Cruise in a nutshell.
So we'll be right back with the review. So to get into the review part of things, I think first I want to just debunk a few of the things in here that just were not quite adding up when I was watching it, especially as somebody, both of my parents served in the Army, in the US military. And I was like, I'm not a Navy brat, but some of this ain't making sense. So I was like, let me talk to one of my parents who are the source. And my dad was literally like, there is no way that this man could have been gone for 4 or 5 years for 6 months out of the year. It would literally cost the Navy too much money to have a ship with over 1,000 people on it for that long. He's like, at max 3 months, because people get burnt out as well. They only do 1 to 3 months. Anything more than that is insane. So her saying she has not seen her daddy for 4 or 5 years for more than a month or two literally would never happen. The military would not let that happen. And the only way that something like that could possibly happen, and it still would not happen many years, is if he kept volunteering to go on the ship every couple months. And I will say, even with that, the military would not let you do that after a certain period, especially because this was during peacetime.
Yeah.
There's once we get into the 9/11 bit, obviously that changes, but pre that, this was peacetime. So there's no way that man would have been gone for 4 or 5 years. And the military would not have been you need to go home with your family, because the military is very family focused, because they realize that's how a lot of soldiers stay sane. So you can't just have people on a boat for that long. They literally would burn out and go crazy. So I would just like to debunk that. Also, her saying she's getting jumped by the Navy, by children because she's a Navy brat. That does not happen. Nobody cares that much. Or are they going to be like, ooh, you just got back from Germany? No, that's not a time. Nobody cares that much about you. Now, if she came in there being I think I'm high and mighty and better than all of you because I've traveled, that's a different story. That can happen. But there's no way that a bunch of kids would literally be like, oh my God, the weird new Navy brat. Because in the States, and especially if you're near a military base, which she clearly was because they lived on one, which I also have questions about, because most military bases, you also go to the school on the base. So again, this is a moot point. But let's say she did not. Let's say she went to the public school outside of the base. Fine. You're near a military base, so people are used to people going and coming and going. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yep. It also is there's also well, here's what I feel about. I feel that what it is that you and your dad have emotional issues, both together and in your relationship, and also individually. Mm-hmm. Like, you're going through your angsty teen thing and you think no one understands you and and you have sort of used the like Navy bit of it to justify like that feeling. Like that's what you've put it on instead of understanding that like something else is going on. This is a personal problem. But
Literally.
then your father, here's what it is. If that's true and daddy just doesn't come home, that is a man who does not want to have a family. And the reason that like you are in this predicament is because your mother hasn't decided to leave him yet.
Girl.
You know what I mean? Like, that's what it is. She hasn't decided to leave him. She has no intention of doing that. And your father has figured out that he has two options. He can come home and try to be a family man. It's not going to be for him. And he will go out to get a pack of cigarettes one day and never come back. Or he could just keep going back to work. He could just stay at sea. And that's an acceptable way to abandon one's family if you really want to do that. It reminds me actually quite heavily, I said this while we were watching it, of Matt Saracen's father in Friday Night Lights.
Yes.
Who clearly is like, this civilian life just isn't for me.
Yeah. No, and there are legitimately people like that. Because my dad said he's like, you would have people that like, you know, when we started the Iraqi-Afghanistani war, there would be a lot of people that would be deployed like 5 times. And he's like, you would hear that. And he's like, the first thing we would think if you're in the military is we were just like, so you got a second family. Because that's the only reason you have a second family. And like you're trying to see them. You're not trying to see your first family. Or you're supporting your second family. Because the thing is that I think people don't realize is people get paid more when you're deployed. You get a lot more money because obviously you're in the middle of a war. And so you get paid a lot more money. So a lot of people would do it for the money too. Because you're already getting paid well in the military. I mean, the thing is they work for the government. So anybody can look up their salaries because they're set by the government and they're out in the open. But you get paid a lot more. So a lot of people would do it for that too. So there's like a variety of things that this could have been. Did the man have a second family? We don't know. Exactly. He's literally not trying to be a family man. I think that's probably most likely it. He just was like not cut out, but he clearly wanted to keep coming back home and making babies because they had 3 kids.
No, I think it's just 2. I think it's just her and her sister.
I thought they said she had a brother too, didn't they? Or somebody else?
Is that? Maybe
I feel like they
else
mentioned somebody else in the beginning. Like they have a little sister and there's somebody else that they met. Like you have your brother or something. I don't know. Maybe I missed it. Maybe there aren't 3. Maybe it's just a 2. But
I either way,
Daddy came home at some point to have the little one.
Either way, like the point is this is a family problem. Like this is not.
We have a bigger
This is not
here.
typical of how the military operates.
Right.
This is just a family issue. But I appreciate you making those things clear for myself and the rest of us who have less knowledge of how the U.S. military operates.
You know, you just got to debunk some things because I was like, this is not. I was watching it with Nina. I was like, this isn't making sense. That's just not how it works.
Yeah, we were confused. We had questions.
What were we gonna say?
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one other thing that we kind of talked about as well that Chuck Horner says is when he first meets Joey, he asks him, he's like, oh, you know, what does your dad do? And he's like, it's my mom. And then Mr. Horner's like, oh yeah, they let women on ships now because obviously he was in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War when that was not a thing. So he's just like, oh, this is surprising. And I would just like to say that as somebody who had both of my parents serve in the Army, but my mom served much longer. My dad got out at like 20 years, but my mom served like 31. And so I would also always get the exact same thing. It was always like, what's your dad do? And I'm like, well, my dad actually was lower ranking because he got out earlier than my mom. And my mom is the higher ranking one and was in much longer. So like, can we just stop with the assumptions that just because it's something that's typically identified as like what men do, like there's a lot of women who were in the military, guys.
Yeah. And it's been that way for long enough now where
For our
the
entire
assumption
generation, at least.
exactly where the assumption like doesn't make sense anymore. Like it doesn't like I can give a pass to like like a baby boomer,
Yeah.
I suppose. Like that's where my passes like sort of stop. Like if you were born after like 1970, like
Women
you
have
should
been in the military since
women
you
have been
were
in the
like
military. You know what I mean?
conscious.
Exactly. Like so just like let's just like guess what? America needs everybody to be able to serve because the military has become less and less attractive as a place for people to spend their lives and careers. So they need all the bodies they can get. And they have let everybody it's an equal opportunity US military.
Except when it comes to
Not
drafting.
really. I was gonna say not really. That's actually not true. I take that statement back entirely.
But women
I
can
apologize exactly that I said
women
that,
can join. However, women still cannot be drafted, and they just started letting women into the infantry like I think like a year or two ago. So we still have a lot of strides to be made here, but like women are very much in the military. So like don't always assume that it's the person's father who was the one in there.
Yeah, that's just like the basic of that. But yeah, I think like the biggest thing that I noticed while watching this, and I mentioned this to Chelsea sort of near the end where I was like, I expected going into this film to be a lot more sort of triggered and harrowed by rewatching it. I expected to like tear up, and so like I had monthly prepared myself for the fact that like this might be an experience because I haven't seen it since I was it came out in 2004. I don't think I've seen it since I was like 12 or 13 maybe. But that isn't what happened. It it wasn't as like sad or harrowing or triggering or traumatic or any of that stuff as I expected it to be. And what that suggests to me, and it's a really interesting thing that it suggests to me, is sort of just like the normalization of terror that has happened since 9/11, since this movie came out. Like first and foremost, like 9/11 did happen when I was young enough that like I understood it, but it didn't it changed the world around me for sure, right? But I wasn't necessarily cognizant of that large drastic change to the world, if that makes sense. Most of my life has existed post 9/11, has existed with terror being just like a part of existing as an American citizen, whether or not that terror is real or heightened or sort of hyperbolically told to us. It's something that permeates the general airspace, and you feel that. So this, I just found that super interesting to like really grapple with that in that moment, being like, oh, like I am not as harrowed, as affected by terror as say people who may have been even 14 when 9/11 happened, and anybody else older. Because this is just something that I have always known that this is a thing. I grew up with, like when I was taking the train by myself, I was hearing from the time I was 11, I was hearing, if you see something, say something. Like I knew that, when I travel, I have to take off my shoes. I have to I don't take liquids. Like all of those things are just part of my upbringing. And therefore my worldview. And it's just an interesting thing to realize, that you really are a child of wartime.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. And I feel like, especially because we were both 8 when 9/11
I think you were
happened.
7, Chelsea.
Yeah, I was technically 7 because my birthday was in a month. But, we were both in 3rd grade.
Yeah, we were
Same
both year.
In 3rd grade, and we were both 7, 8. So it really shaped how we saw the world because I was actually living in Pennsylvania at the time, and they knocked down a tower in Pennsylvania as well. People don't really talk about it. Like, it happened there as well. And so at the time we lived on a military base because my mom was going to school, and yeah, like it was just like it also hit us very much because of that. So I just feel like, our entire generation has very much been shaped by this, because we were even discussing how pre 9/11 airlines and like flying was a completely different experience that like we kind of remember, but barely because we were so
Yeah.
small. But like sometimes I'll see it when I watch older movies that came out before then. And I'm like, wow, people used to be able to take you to right to your gate and wait with you until your plane took off. Like it was a totally different experience, and everything. 9/11 just shaped so much of how we experience the world. And we very much, like you said, grew up where terror is always around, and like hijacking when you're on a plane is something that you're always thinking about when you're on a plane, even if it's not the whole time. It definitely comes into your mind because it happens a lot now, or not a lot, but relatively on occasion. So it's just like there's always, you have just a different thought process. And it's definitely a type of trauma that I don't think people really they don't really assign to, I think, the littler kids unless you had a direct effect to your family.
Yeah.
But I do think that like we all had a traumatic effect in this nation because of that. And honestly, all over the world, because it isn't just like the US that has these, now stringent airport rules. Like it's now all over the world, so I do think like it was like that. It was a day that, to quote Pearl Harbor, a day that lived in infamy.
Yeah. which is another fun little bit to get to.
Yes. But yeah, I definitely feel like it marked an entire generation, just like I feel like COVID is now marking the current generation that is, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like that little kid in age, but they're like conscious and they know what's going on. Yeah, so I will be very interested to see how this is going to be for them as well as they get older, because I'm sure they're going to be like, this was traumatic. We had to stay inside for 2 years.
Yeah, and just the way that like I'm curious to see like in the way that like 9/11 created institutional, like
Yeah.
the idea of it's a trauma, it's like it's a societal trauma.
Yes.
And we see that reflected in like changes to institutional ways that we operate, and procedural, like larger government procedural ways that we operate. I blame 9/11 for the heavy militarization of the New York Police Department and the fact that they are literally a walking fucking army right now. And I'm a Black woman from Brooklyn. Like I don't necessarily have the best relationship with that, but I'm curious to see how we can see it with like airlines, and we can see it with like police militarization and things like that. I'm curious to see like how those kids will see it reflected back to them in their society. Like, will they walk around being like, oh, it's wild to think about the fact that like when we watch old films, we don't see hand sanitizer pumps everywhere. You know what I mean? Like that sort of shifting of like institutions caring about certain things significantly more.
I definitely feel like one of the most affected parts for the kids as of now, and I'm sure this is obviously, we're going to see the wider effects as you're saying, the more we go on, but I definitely think education has been the biggest affected as of now institutionally, because it had to be. And also the entire labor, the labor system has been completely upended in a way that nobody would have ever expected. So yeah, it is crazy to think. And I think something else that we had talked about was also the fact that after 9/11 happened, everything like you were just expected to just like go to work the next day. I feel like even New Yorkers too, like it's like we don't know how to handle things here. Everything is just like, if you act business as usual, everything is business as usual, instead of like taking the time to be like, maybe we should like chill for a week or two. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
And like
it
as a
was
nation, and I feel like we're seeing that as well with COVID, and a lot of people are saying it. Like, they're like, it's wild that all of this, we're still, I would say, very much in the middle of COVID. Like, it is not defeated by any means, but we're people are getting vaccinated, so everybody feels a little bit better about things, X, Y, and Z, however you feel about that, but it is what it is. And everybody is now just like, okay, but when are we going back to the office? And it's just like, there's just nothing is stopping. And I feel like sometimes we as a country, I feel like we as a world, honestly, because this isn't even US specific, like everybody is doing the same thing right now, where I'm like, I think we just need to take a pause sometimes and just be like, maybe we need to process the fact that we've just lived through something horrible for almost 2 years. And in 9/11's case, like, let's pause and acknowledge the fact that we've just lost so many people in one day. Like, and it
yeah.
in a way that is not, it is a terror attack. Like, and so yeah, I just feel like there's no, it's, I mean, it's capitalism, but there really is just like no pausing to like be like, yeah, maybe we should all deal with this trauma or at least attempt to for like a week or two or something.
Yeah, but I do think that there is a slight like the thing that makes the 9/11 bit of it very, and like part of this is saying this like as a New Yorker. Like first of all, like again, 8. So I only sort of there's only so much that I like held on to, let's say, right? Like I remember a lot more feeling than I do specific events. Um but like I do know that it's it was a thing of like I think there's a difference when it is something that results in high alert, and you have to be in a place of high defense, because like once like if that is the case, then like you can't necessarily pause, or even like if there are pauses, those pauses aren't going to happen in the places where they are needed the most. Like you don't have an opportunity to there was no opportunity after 9/11 to be like, okay, let's all like stop and like think about what we've been going through. Like I think the only place where you did get any sense of that, and they did it specifically for kids, was like in schools, right? Like I remember like, there being things about like, oh, like, moments where like we would talk about what was happening as a class, and like like what we were feeling, and having like moments of silence in the morning, like during like morning announcements, like let's have moments of silence for like people who are lost it up. But even when that was happening, I remember so it's like it's weird, like my principal, her son had died in the towers, and that was something that we all knew. So it was like this weird coupling of like, yeah, we're doing these moments of silence. Yeah, we're like talking about these things, but we also know that like the person leading this, like she's lost her son. Like we know that. So there wasn't, even in the moment of a pause, it's not really a moment of a pause, because like you still have to do these things. Like she still has to. She's lost a child. She is still responsible for the children of others. Like it's and like the people, like the cops still, they have to go and do the thing, the firemen have to go and do the thing, the EMTs have to go and do the thing, the doctors have to do the thing. So like it's a weird coupling, because like while I sort of agree with you for like the mental health of everyone, at the same time I sort of really understand, like beyond just like the capitalism ways, like I understand why, like when it's an attack, why the pause is super difficult, or the pause doesn't necessarily always achieve what we would like it to, if it exists.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that it always gets complicated when it comes to the people that need to be the first responders to things, because even with what's going on now, it's like, the nurses have to be working, the doctors have to be working. Like if you're an EMT, all of that, you need to be working right now, or this past year. So I definitely see that. I just feel like once you're out of that space of high alert, that's when I'm saying I'm like,
I guess I'd make the argument that we've never gotten out of high alert of 9/11. Like it was an event that triggered a series of responses that have only expanded that. Terror is a worldwide like phenomenon. And this like war of culture that we are existing, like it's still happening. And it was happening then, but we weren't on high alert. I don't think that we've ever come down from high alert. So I don't think that we've ever actually had a moment to like pause and like think about like terror and think about the ways that we've contributed to, that we've like think about just like the complicated nature of the rising of terror, or like how anybody gets to the point of not only willing to do that, but then also like how do we deal with the fact that these things were done to us by other, like it becomes like that moment. I don't think that that's happened yet. I think that we are still entirely living through like this larger sort of war of culture. Whether or not I believe that we should be doing that is a different story. In fact, I don't think that I believe that we should be doing that. Like, I think that it's a war that should really end, and there's a level of just like respect that we should all have for like everybody's cultures. But like, I don't think that that's the place that we're in yet.
No, and I think that is a good point as well. I do think that is a legitimate thing because, yeah, we haven't ever really like just taken a pause, because even with what's going on now and like we all had to go, work from home like last March, and like when everything hit, we never even took a pause then, which is why I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like we're never going to be off high alert, so you have to make it happen. That's how I personally feel. But I understand what you're saying as well, and I think that's like a legitimate point, and I think that's probably where most people are seeing it from. I'm just somebody where I'm just like, you have to make it happen because it's never going to happen otherwise. You know what I mean?
Nah, I get you. I can respect that.
So that's just like my perspective on it. Because just like a nationwide trauma, I just feel like of the scale of 9/11, and then of the scale that we've experienced and we're still in from the past year and a half, I'm just like, we just need like a week. Like at least, just like, you don't have to go to work. A week, just a week of just like, please just take care of yourselves. But I understand that like on a wider level, that's probably literally impossible. But I would like to stay in my little idealistic bubble right now. So I would just love to see it personally. But yes, I do see what you're saying. And I think that is probably the reason as to why it's never happened, because we've never quite gotten out of the forest. So
yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's very like, and that's where like this gets super interesting. Like I found it, like you brought up Pearl Harbor, and okay, so quick like fun facts. They take off from they embark. That's the word. They embark from Pearl Harbor. Like that's where the Tiger Cruise leaves from on September 9th, 2001. Which is already like, I was like, okay, that's a little fine.
A little on the nose.
A little on the nose. But they keep like referencing Pearl Harbor in this film, and it's that thing that they're doing. And it came out in 2004, and I was just like, the moment it happened the first time, I was like, oh, so that's what they did. They really like, they put it in the film, and they were like, BT Dub's children, 9/11 is entirely justification for war. Just like Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Just like Pearl Harbor. Like when we're attacked, we hit back. That's what America does. And you should be proud of that. That's the message. I of course have thoughts on that, generally speaking. Those thoughts might be too long for this podcast. But yeah, they push that in there pretty strongly, and it gets into that thing of this film as, while it exists certainly for me, like, and that's what I remember as a kid. It existed in a place of comfort, you know, because you're seeing like kids deal with this thing, and you're like, I'm dealing with this thing, and like my friends are dealing with this thing, and it's nice to like watch us like look after each other. Like, it's a really comforting film in that way. It's also riddled with propaganda, because that's just the nature of anything about the U.S. military, you know, like, for better or worse, propaganda galore. The little girl who literally only ever draws, like, that's all she ever does. In the moment when she is like, I have an idea of something that we could do, like, does she channel that energy into creativity? No, she's just like, yo, let's display the flag. And that's like, you know, that's a very military response. On the ship, like, they do that very, like, you get that very military response of like, yeah, there's fear and there's uncertainty and there's pain, but you know what? We got to keep pushing and we got to do our job. There's that call to duty that happens. The reason that this family rift can be solved in any way is because of this call to duty that her father entrusts in her, and because she gets to watch her father in action. And it's this idea that, you know, like, those sort of principles of those very military principles of like discipline and soldier and duty, honor, all of that are what can heal things, what can protect things, what can save things, and what can bring people together. And that's definitely a military belief. That's definitely something America would like you to believe. Whether or not I think that that's actually true, again, might be too long for the podcast, but that's just how I felt.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that the propaganda was strong in this one. I was actually asking Nina, I was like, I wonder if Disney went to the military for this one and was like, hey, we want to do something themed about you, you know, the Navy during 9/11, blah, 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 or whether the military came to them and was like, we want to do a kids movie that's focused on this, because I was like, I would not be surprised, because they do have an entire communications department, and like that's their whole job. And actually, when Barack was in office, Michelle signed or made an agreement with the U.S. military and the entertainment industry that they were going to make a certain amount of like military focused film and TV shows. Obviously, that was like in 2008, 2009, so after this. But I just think I don't think a lot of people realize that there's very much a relationship between the US military and the entertainment world. And that's why you get a lot of these film and TV shows that are focused on the military specifically, and how they have access to the bases, how they have access to these boats. Like, all of this kind of stuff is because they're supposed to show the military favorably. And they make those types of agreements on purpose. So I would not be surprised if the military came to them and was like, we need to do a movie that is getting to children. And it's talking about how the military is so great, and like what we did on 9/11 and blah, blah, blah. So I would not have been shocked had it gone that way versus Disney approaching them. But it could have been the other way as well. I truly don't know, but I do think the military propaganda is really strong in here, and I do think that is one thing that we saw post 9/11 is like the military propaganda ramped up so much.
Yeah, dude, it's everywhere.
Like, it was already there to a degree before, but not to the level the aughts were like chock full of just military, like everything. You had all of the commercials because we were in the war, and the kids were sending care packages, and like they had all those shows that were specifically about parents coming home and like running to meet their kids. And like, you guys remember all of this, the YouTube channels were solely about, like, that was a whole genre. It still kind of is, but like it's lessened because we've started taking more and more people out of Iraq and Afghanistan. But it really had a hold. Like,
and I think before 9/11, it was like, yes, it was still there, but people were still living in a post-Vietnam place.
Post-Gulf War.
And like the relationship, or just, you know, both.
Yeah,
It's a
both of those.
situation where like the relationship to the US military was very, very fraught. I think sort of generally. Not everywhere, not everywhere. Like it was just it was a lot more fraught. Like there were a lot more people that questioned it, a lot more people that had come up in eras where the military was being heavily questioned. And the way in which America waged war was being heavily questioned. And that's like, we're living in an in-between place of that now. But 9/11 did create a moment where like, it's literally the first time that we've been attacked since Pearl Harbor. It's the first time that we've had something happen on American soil in the 21st century. And it started the 21st century, which is wild. Like that's
truly
really
insane.
How the century began. So like
Truly insane.
So it allowed the space. It allowed a space to really shore up the military, and people were really okay with sort of getting behind the military in a way that I don't think had been as uncomplicated for a while before that.
Yeah, and I think something else actually similar to what you were saying earlier about your experience with 9/11 and like our generation specifically and like the trauma inflicted. I think another good point to make about that is how 9/11 happening spurred us going to war, of course, with Iraq and Afghanistan. But we've literally been in wartime ever since. I don't think people realize that we're still over there and we're still fighting, but like we actively are.
Yeah.
So we're still technically in wartime. So we've now been in war for what is that, like 70% of our lives? Like, which is like insane. And I don't think people realize it. And I want to say this is one of the longest wars we've ever had in the US.
Yeah, for sure. It's
because
been
like this is decades.
20. It's 20 years. It's a full 20 years. It's about to be 20 years.
2 decades of war. And so I just also think that also was not really discussed and how that's also impacted our generation. Because I don't think Generation Z is just coming up in a different time. Where I think by the time they were, coming into their teenagehood, Obama had started already taking out like a good amount of the troops. So the idea is, and all of the coming home celebrate, like all that kind of stuff, they didn't necessarily grow up with that by the time they got to high school, I don't think.
Yeah.
So it's just very different. Whereas I feel like our generation, we really only lived 8 years. And then the next thing, we're in war. Like we were literally in war.
Like our generation is the generation of 9/11 and No Child Left Behind. Like
Truly.
It's so crazy.
While we were actively bombing children. But anyways.
Exactly. Like it's like honestly, all things considered, we are wildly well adjusted. I must say. I mean, most of that is a genuine numbing to the world and everything around us, but I am shocked that we are not a lot more visibly traumatized than we are,
Yeah, no, we had that. We had the recession. Like we've
been struggling.
People like don't associate it with us. They just think we're
don't.
lazy, and I'm just like, no.
No. We are suffering from all of this shit. All the shits like
that
they just
you guys have put us into,
just raining down. And every time that we think we've gotten through one, COVID. Like every time that we think that we like, like maybe I can breathe now. Maybe I can pause and look after myself. This is what happens. And that is why this is a generation that is so focused on self-care and is turning to things like crystals, because clearly all science gave me was AK-47
and also stopped going to
bombs.
Church. Like our
exactly, we were just like, we're over it. New age, like I want new age. I want holistic medicine, and I'm gonna take care of me first because clearly nobody else is trying to do it.
We were so tired.
And you know what?
So tired.
That's what it is. Like I can't be mad at it. I can't. What am I gonna tell you? Like you're kind of right.
Right. No, I do think there is a lot that plays into it, but I for sure think that's something that people don't remember, or like it's just like we are actively at war, so it's just, there's a lot going on. We're just actively at war, and I just think we should like talk about that more often. But yeah, the propaganda in this is like truly insane. The military culture itself, I think, is so strong in this country, and you really notice it when you go to other places and you realize that they do not give a fuck about their military. Like they just don't care. Like when I lived in Spain, it was just like they're like, okay, like about the Spanish military, like nobody cared about them. Meanwhile, we're over here like y'all get military discounts and like it's a whole culture here. Like
I didn't know that they did that. Like,
yeah,
because they don't do that in New York.
yeah,
So
in the
like, I
city.
didn't know. Yeah,
In New York City, that we gotta
yeah, sorry, in New
yeah.
York City, maybe like upstate, but like in the city, like I never grew up with the concept of a military discount. So the
Mhm.
first time that I like ventured out into another part of America and like realized that people were upset with New York about that, I was like, oh, huh, okay.
Yeah.
Like I just put it in real perspective for me of like, oh, right, like it's the military is everywhere.
Yeah, no, the
It's
rest of
everywhere.
America has a very different relationship to the military than New York City does, for sure. But yeah, it's just very interesting. We just have a very specific military based culture here that does not really exist elsewhere. Um, and it's weird. It's a little weird. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot of propaganda, and especially as somebody who grew up in it and lived on many military bases, they suck you in very early. Like you get brainwashed very early. I'm not going to lie. Like I don't know how else to call it, because I just think of the fact that all the military bases that have theaters and you go and watch movies there, before they start playing previews, you have to stand up and they play the national anthem and have the flag on the screen, and you have to stand up in a dark theater, and that was normal. And you're just kind of like, okay, like you just accept it because that's just what it is. But then you get older and you're like, this is weird.
Yeah, and like we don't even think about, like, it was something I didn't even think about it when it happened. It was like when I got older and I was thinking back to the fact, I was like, wait, when did I stop saying the Pledge of Allegiance and singing the Star Spangled Banner and America the Beautiful? It was all three.
Mm-hmm.
Um every morning. Like, when did I stop doing that? And I was like, oh, when I went to private school.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the thing. And like I don't know, you know what I mean? Like I see that happen in like other places in the world, but in like like during like World War II, like in and then in the 50s.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. Like I really couldn't tell you. Like, is that something that is like a global phenomenon, or is it just like this weird nationalist like holdover
No, it's just
um
us.
that exists in America? Okay, good
I'm
to know.
100%
That exists in
sure it's
America.
just us.
And it's like kind of weird, like because it also just like because it's not, it's like not just, it'd be one thing if it was like just the Pledge of Allegiance.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the whole thing about like, there being kids who sat down during the Pledge of Allegiance who didn't stand up because of like the whole like God bit of it. And or that was often the reason. And like I even remember like the othering of that. Like I understood that as like a 7-year-old. It was like, oh, so you're different.
Mm-hmm.
And not in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm sure that only made so many things post 9/11, especially for Muslim children in this country. Like because like at least in my experience, often it was Muslim children who did not stand up during the Pledge of Allegiance. Like in my class, I had 2 friends who didn't stand up, and it was because like whenever I asked them about it, they were like, oh, like it's because like of like the God line, because it's like we recognize Allah, or like we don't call it the same thing, and so like I can't say that. Like that was the sort of general thing about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I can imagine, and like that's fine. There's nothing fucking wrong with that. And there are many reasons why like parents might tell their children like don't stand up for that stuff. Like if they don't believe in what it says, if they have an issue with not separating church and state, like all of that. There are a million reasons for you to not like necessarily want your kid to do that every single morning. But like I can only imagine, and I really can only imagine like the terror that created for like those kids,
Mm-hmm.
who existed in a place where they were like where they like the propaganda is happening all around them, and they're not supposed to respond to it. And that only makes it easier for other kids to like hate them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It only fuels like this deep like sense of us and them. And that sense of like, and they're in our country. Like all of these just like horrible nationalist, like xenophobic tendencies that we've seen rise more and more and more. So like, yeah, I agree with you that it is like I would call it also brainwashing. I think that that's just what it is. And I think that we should call it by its name
Mm-hmm.
and begin to reckon with the fact that like that is what we are doing. That is what part of what the American military does. Now, is there a world in which you can make an argument for like the idea of like, oh, you have to do that in the same way you can make arguments for like the CIA has to keep secrets? Sure, you can make the argument, but that doesn't change the fact that it's brainwashing. You know what I mean? Like it's still brainwashing.
It
and
is.
we should call it what it is.
Have you ever seen recorded like when kids are reciting the national anthem? It looks so weird and culty. Like it's weird. It's like objectively weird. And
it reminds me of, you ever seen Jesus Camp?
No.
You should watch the documentary. It's wild. But that's the place that it lives in for me. It's like almost like religious fervor. It's like this is, and culty as you say. It's like this is actually a darker thing than we're pretending that it is.
We just have so much, Americans just have so much nationalism. And like I said, I don't think people really realize it until you go elsewhere. And then you realize that other people kind of don't care outside of athletic events, what country that they belong to. Because I swear in Spain, half of the Spanish kids in my school did not know their national anthem. Like it just didn't, it was just like, I mean, sure, but like, why? You know, like what was the purpose? They didn't care. They're like, we just, you know, they're like, I think they play it when we go, like Real plays Barca, but like, I mean, other than that, like, we do not care. And I was like, I don't blame you, because why would you care? And because I also went to private schools, but I went to private Christian schools, so we still had to do the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, and also do a Pledge of Allegiance to the Christian flag, which, sure.
There's a Christian flag?
Yeah, it's by the I think it's Assemblies of God or the Evangelicals. There's a Christian flag, so we would have to do a Pledge of Allegiance to that too. We would do American flag and then the Christian flag. So
actually, there's a chance that the Christian flag is in Jesus Camp, and I blocked that out. Anyway,
oh, that would track.
Like, there's a chance that that flag is in there, and I just didn't. Yeah. I just didn't understand what I was seeing.
It's a thing. Also, side note, Rami had a great episode about that season 1 about being a Muslim kid during 9/11 called Strawberries. I highly recommend everybody watch it, because that's like one of the, I think that's actually the only representation we've got where a Muslim American person is like, here's what it was like for me in New Jersey right after 9/11. So yeah, I highly recommend everybody watch that, to your point. But you know, Nina, would you show this one to your kids?
I actually think that here's the thing. I don't know when I would do it. I don't know. It's weird because it's really what it really is a question about is how am I going to, like, and at what point am I going to discuss 9/11 with my children? You know, like, am I going to wait for them to learn about it in school and come home and ask questions? Or is it something, you know, like, and that's it. Are we going to be living in New York? Like, are we going to be like, where are we? Because like, you know, it's weird. Like my godson, it was super weird to see like my godson he was like 4 or 5, like he like understood, like he knew about 9/11. And it was because like he lived sort of near One World Trade as it was like being unveiled and all that stuff, and like they would go a lot, so he like engaged with it a lot. And he understood, and he would like point out, he'd be like, look, like that, like, and he'd be like, that's where they flew the planes into the towers, right? Like he knew that at like 4 and 5, like he understood that, and I just remember one night with him doing that, and he said something to me. He was like, he showed me about it, and then he's like, yeah, it scares me. You know what I mean? And it was like this weird thing for me of being like, oh, like these kids, like the kids learn about it, they know about it, and like it's still scary. Like they understand the terror of it. and we have been raising children in terror. Like I can't really remember as that much of my life, like when terror wasn't a thing, but it wasn't a thing when I was a baby.
Right.
I wasn't being held in the arms of a person who was terrified. And a lot of children are now. So like that's just like a thing to know. And so, it's a question about, I think, how am I going to engage with my children about this thing? And I actually think, generally, I think that this is a very good film for kids about this. I like this. Like, I'm sure we talked about how it's interesting, like the structure that they chose for this. How they decided to, like, they're not on the mainland. You know what I mean? They're literally at sea. They chose to do children grappling with this thing, but they did it by removing them from America. Like, they're not on the land. They're out at sea. They're isolated. It's kids from all over the place. It's not familiar people. You know what I mean? And it's that thing of, like, I know that it has to do with, like, first of all, making every kid feel like they're represented. This is a nationwide broadcast. It's about making every kid feel that they're represented. And showing that it affected the whole country. But it also, like, it does this thing of, like, we all need to be there for each other. We're all experiencing this thing, like, we all need to be there for each other. So I understand, like, why they made all those choices. And then they make it a thing about, it's like really about family. And it's about, like, how these large things mean that we have to put, like, petty squabbles aside, or that's, like, the idea. And, like, this is a lot of that is propaganda and all of that, but it lives in a place where it's a lot more about sort of, like, the emotion of the thing than it is about the horror of the thing. And I think that is a good way to engage with kids about it, like, coming in not from, like, the terror, but of, like, all right, you have to understand, like, this is a thing that happened. And yeah, it did scare a lot of people, and it changed a lot of things, like, and but the, like, it was the whole, like, the idea is that to learn from it, that, like, we should be better to each other. Like, that is what it's like, that's the lesson that we have to sort of that I would want you to take from it. So I think I would show it to them. I think it's a good film for them to watch about that thing, but I think it's a film that would also I would watch it with them, and we would talk about it. We talk about the film, we talk about the event, we talk about the responses. They could ask me any question they wanted. Like, it would be something that we would have to really, like, sit down as a family and, like, talk through together. I think about it as, like, the way that I'm going to have to talk to my kids about police brutality. Like, this is a real thing that we live with every single day. It's a real thing that, like, mommy experienced and lived through, and, like, and it's going to affect you. It's going to affect you because it affected me, if for no other reason. You know what I mean? And I'm the one raising you. So it's going to affect you. But it's also going to affect you because these things changed the world. And they created the world that you live in, and you need to be aware of them. And I think that this is a good entry point. So yeah, I think I will. What about you, Chelsea? Will you show this to your kids?
I think I would as well. Because, like you said, I actually do think it is a fairly good entree point. I think we said this in the beginning, but this is actually a very well done film. Like, it's engaging and it's engrossing, and, like, other than obviously, like like Nina said, the obvious propaganda, there really are no missteps. Like, it was put together very well. The script is well done and it's tight. And so I feel like it actually is quite a good entry point for a lot of kids to kind of understand, like, oh wow, this is what happens. And they announce how many people passed, and they announce the 3 big attacks, and, like, it gets the point across very well in a way that I think is digestible for your average, like, 7 to 10-year-old. That's probably a lot. And I don't know, just like sitting down and talking to them about the facts or something. I don't know what would be the alternative, but like whatever that might be, I do think it is a great conversation starter. Like you said, it's a good way to get into the whole discussion about what happened and all of that. And I'm sure they do learn about it in school now, but I don't know when they normally teach them. Um, because I am sure it must come up, I'm assuming, some point before 6th or 7th grade.
Oh, for sure. I would
Yeah,
think.
I don't know when that is, but it must. And I'm sure, especially if they live in New York. But yeah, so I feel like it's actually a very good conversation starter, like you said. I think I would show it to my kids. Because I think it's easy. It's an easy way to get into it, and it's not too traumatic. And I don't. Do they have any other kids movies out about 9/11? I'm sure somebody must have done one, right?
Yeah, there were like I remember being younger and there were a bunch of like I remember a lot of like specials and
Right.
like like the sort like the half hour things and like a lot
Yeah.
of television episodes about like the trauma of it and like the and like grief counselors at schools and things like that. I honestly can't think of another like specific film made for
Mm-hmm.
children that was like impactful for me or that I like watched and was like, oh, duh. Like I
Okay.
remember, like you know what I mean. I know that I remember like Fahrenheit 9/11, and I think those are actually like the I would think like those are the only two like films about 9/11 that I actually remember. I remember a lot more like the compilation CDs that my father would come home with that we would play. Like I actually just remember a lot more of the music of that period of
Time.
time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like I learned a lot of songs that I would never probably have engaged with or known about if it hadn't been for 9/11 and
Mm-hmm.
the general national response to it. Um, but yeah, I actually do think that this is the only it's certainly the only one that I remember. It's certainly the only one that was impactful for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For sure. So yeah, I think it would be a very good discussion point. I would definitely say also if you would like to rewatch, I think we both recommend it. It was actually
Yeah.
we like as much as you can enjoy a sad film. Like
Yeah.
it's a
Um,
well done kids, sad film.
yeah. Yeah. And it's Hayden Panettiere in her heyday, so or at the
Yes.
beginning of her heyday.
Before she became the cheerleader who saved the world.
Or save the the
We
cheerleader that we had to save in order to save the
save the
world.
world. Well, yes, but that makes her the cheerleader that
Save the world. You're
saved the
right. No,
world.
you're right. It's it's early.
Well, all
I'm
right,
still
guys.
sipping this coffee. All right, but
We'll talk to
thank you
you
so much for
later.
listening, and we'll catch you next week.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of The Critics Kingdom. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and SoundCloud so you can stay up to date, as well as interacting and letting us know what you guys think on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Critics Kingdom and on Instagram at The Critics Kingdom. We're excited to talk to you again next week.